This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, and ideas from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Connect with us to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I'm your host, Jamie Wood, and our topic today, fighting for revenue, selling traditional media in a tech-disrupted market. Now, global tech platforms like Google, Facebook, TikTok, they're disrupting traditional media by sucking up larger and larger shares of advertising budgets. They're attracting clients with promises of precision targeting, first-party data, and measurable, accountable return on investment. This leaves frontline sellers like you of traditional media fighting a bit of an uphill battle to try and justify, your value on the buy, to retain those budgets and obviously to grow revenues as well. Our returning guest today is Brian Gallagher. He's the chairperson of Boomtown. Boomtown is a consortium group advocating for regional consumers and traditional media companies. He has a front row seat to how sellers are navigating this disruption while also championing the unique advantages that only traditional media can deliver. In this episode, we're going to unpack the challenges media sellers are facing. We're going to explore actionable strategies. We're going to try to deliver some practical advice that you can use immediately. But I think importantly, this is going to be a really open kind of free-form discussion on what is a very complex, rather messy, rather nuanced kind of topic. So it is a bit of a heavy listen in a good way. We do take our time with it. We kind of veer off a little bit. But I think that this is really, really important just to start thinking and talking more about. And I think what I kind of most enjoyed about recording this episode was there are some really, really interesting things to take away that you can apply immediately to make you better and more effective as a seller in your role. We do touch a bit on AI and automation, and we sort of touch on some of the different changes that are playing out in media too, which I think will be a nice setup for a future episode. And the final request from me, don't bother liking, following, subscribing. Don't bother commenting on the podcast. Don't worry about doing any of that. All I ask is that if you get value from Media Sales Mastery, if you feel that this is helpful, all I ask is that you share it with somebody else whom you think would enjoy the podcast. Be that a colleague, be that a former colleague, be it a boss. Talk about it in your sales meeting. All I really want to do is get the word out about this podcast to as many media sales professionals as possible. So if you feel some level of gratitude for the podcast, if you feel like it adds value to your life, you would do me the most amazing favor by sharing it with somebody else who you think would get value out of it too. Without any further delay though, let's jump into the podcast episode now with Brian Gallagher.
The first five.
Brian, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Always a pleasure to chat to you, mate. Hey, I know that we sort of covered your background when you were the Chief Sales Officer of SCA, which is when we last spoke. Now you're in a really interesting gig. So for those overseas listeners who are maybe unfamiliar with Boomtown, can you give us a bit of an overview of what Boomtown is and what led to its creation?
Boomtown's creation really was about trying to shine a light on the power of regional media to work as a great advertising vehicle for brands, particularly in the national marketplace. So the problem that we're solving with Boomtown, which is a trade marketing organisation that represents all of the media operators who are exposed to regional markets, so radio, television, print operators who have services into non-metro markets in Australia. What we found over many years was that regional media was on a hierarchy of purchase intention. So once we fix our metro buy, we'll get to our regional buy. And then around 15 years ago, once we fix our media buy, our search and social buy, then we'll get to our regional buy. So regional is always a can that got kicked down the road, but right now there's 10 million Australians that live in regional markets that largely don't receive the same kind of level of ad impression than the metro audiences do. And we had stacks of research that would tell us that brands that were doing certain market shares in metro market were struggling to get to those market shares in regional areas. So corollary, if you advertise, you get an outcome. If you don't, you won't. So Boomtown was formed as a marketing a trade marketing group to push the agenda that regional audiences were just as valuable to marketers as metro audiences. Now, the upshot of all that is that when we launched Boomtown 5 years ago, we had about, or just over 10% market share of total national ad buys. But we had now closer to 19. So I think it was 18.6% last time we looked. So we've almost doubled the market share of the national ad dollar going into regional. And it's quite an interesting argument to have to put, because we're putting that argument largely to professional media buyers. So you wouldn't think that that would be a difficult proposition. But that proposition's become more and more challenged over the years because they have so many more options around how to buy audiences. Geographically, there wasn't too much focus on the delivery, if you know what I mean. Like, there was a lot of, with the advent of bottom of the funnel kind of activity, there was a lot of kind of customer acquisition metrics and other data-driven strategies deployed, but they all seem to leave regional catchments off the markets. And some people believed if they were buying digital advertising, they were getting regional. Sometimes true, not always true. So most campaign structures have a laydown of a certain set of media platforms that delivers a base audience, and then other platforms are layered in over that to deliver on certain other aspects of the strategy. Regional just didn't play a part in many of those discussions. So I think to a large extent over the last 5 years we've dealt with that.
It's funny that point around 5 years, and I've posted about this before on LinkedIn. This is a really good example of what I call like holding your nerve when it comes to trade marketing and putting a message out to market. Like 5 years of consistently telling the same story. Granted, it's been refreshed and there's been an evolving sort of narrative, but 5 years of really, really consistent, almost like brute force to get to this result. And I think there's a lesson here for anyone who is in trade marketing, where it just feels like the nature of what we do is there's always a need to find a new story or a different angle. Sometimes just a consistency and a long-term strategy is what really cuts through and what's really required to, counteract the inertia that might be there in the market.
Yeah, well, talk to academics, talk to sports coaches, talk to athletes, talk to, just about anybody about outcome, and consistent effort is what you're going to hear about. You get into corporate life and it gets down to 4-week budget cycles. It is extremely difficult to focus shareholders, for example. Like if we went out with Boomtown from day one and said, hey, guess what? In 3 years' time, you're really going to see an outcome. It never would have got up.
Yeah.
Because the pressures on all the organisations that are a part of Boomtown and every other trade marketing, media, trade organisation, every other trade organisation for any category, the pressures are much more short-term. So I think it's actually been no minor miracle that we've been able to keep the cats herded for a long enough period of time to demonstrate solid outcome.
I know there was a really considered strategy there. I mean, ease of transaction and providing tools and support for the market to trade easier and insight. Like there was a lot more to it than just kind of a trade marketing push, if you will. But, it really is a testament to, I think, just that long-term focus. And I guess, today's episode, it's sort of a slightly different angle we're coming at here, which is, if I think about the primary audience of Boomtown, it's focused on the metro advertisers and enticing them or encouraging them to reallocate a portion of their budget to regional. You're somebody who's led, a big national sales team and particularly a large regional sales team. And I guess I'm focused more maybe on some of those regional operators right now. What in your perspective, or from your perspective, what are some of the unique challenges that these regional sellers might be facing, particularly those working for legacy media, and how are you seeing that sort of play out?
I just want to step back one bit, just on the observation, because I didn't make the point, and I want to make it now. Is that we do a lot of things in Boomtown, master classes and information hubs and all the good boilerplate stuff. But the success of Boomtown is based on one thing and one thing only, and that is that we spend the majority of our time listening to clients. So we've got a proposition to make, sure, but the most of our effort is listening to clients. We put ourselves in position to hear them speak about their challenges as often as we can, and we operate or we act on that information. A marketing director, a CMO, advertising is 5% of his portfolio. So anything we've got to say is going to be heard through the lens of, a percentage of that 5%. So we take the opportunity to sort of speak to clients and listen to clients really seriously and to act positively on what we hear from them. And then that circles back to the question that you just asked me, which is, what are the challenges that, local legacy media face, and how do they get around resolving that? And the answer is exactly the same. Embrace your client base. Understand the economics of the market you're in, and that might sound complex, but it isn't. In fact, you'll find most regionally based sales directors or sales managers and their teams have a pretty good idea about what drives the economy in their local marketplace. If you go to Rockhampton and you sit down with the teams up there, they will tell you which industries are firing, which industries are not, and the impact of that on advertising. So they've got a pretty good macro lens on the economies of their market, which is kind of like 101 for media salespeople. I mean, I think one of the most frustrating things I would find walking into any media sales department is to be able to ask the question, what's firing the market that you're working in, or what's holding it back. People not having a kind of a view on that would be disappointing. Most of the people I've worked with have a pretty good handle on that. And it's good to understand probably as much about the clients that aren't spending with you as it is to understand about the ones that are. And I think sometimes, particularly in the local media space, people get the view that they've just about tapped the opportunity. And I think that's probably the largest misconception that any local media sales team can have, whether they're metro or regional based, doesn't matter where they are. You've never tapped the total opportunity. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of businesses in Australia that advertise. For the mainstream platforms nationally, there are probably, and again, I might get this number a little wrong, so, forgive me. But on my estimates, based on my knowledge of very large media companies and the total number of advertising accounts they have in any given year, the very, very large geographically spread businesses, which I've worked with a few, have anywhere between 10 and 15,000 active clients a year. And there's a lot of crossover in that. And I estimate that there's probably somewhere around 40,000 advertisers that are active in any given year across the entire Australian marketplace on all of the legacy platforms, utilising their broadcast and their print and their digital assets. Now, there's another couple of 100,000 clients that aren't represented in that pool. Additionally, of that sort of 40,000, there's probably about 4,000, I think, that make up the agency client base. So the vast majority of the advertiser numbers are SMEs. And what I also think is really super interesting is that when you look at last year's PwC numbers, it rough enough scopes out the traditional media pool, metro, regional, everything. All money's going to traditional media operators, whether it's through their legacy or digital services, at around $6.5 billion, rough enough. And then money being spent on other platforms to advertise, mostly offshore, is circa 15 bill. So it seems to me that the 40,000 advertisers that are buying traditional media, there must be an absolute shed ton of other advertisers, and I'm kind of, in my mind, ratifying that number a little bit, and I think it's probably closer to 12. But in any event, it's in excess of 10 bill going into search, social and other forms of display and video advertising.
Wow.
They're buying all of that on a self-serve basis.
So this is probably a really good setup for, I guess, the main topic.
Media sales mastery.
One of the things I wanted to try and do here, BG, was define the threat, right? So I'm a media sales professional for a legacy publisher. In your observation, what are the key selling points that some of these global tech platforms are using to win these budgets? And specifically, how do they enchant clients? Where are traditional media companies most vulnerable when it comes to competing with these platforms for available dollars in the market?
The threat is lack of ambition. All right? The threat is not digital media platforms, because I could spend all day poking holes in the efficacy of those platforms, right? I'll come back to that. Let's come back to that under the topic of commerce and outcome. The threat is lack of ambition to tackle this. Now, if you put in front of any entrepreneurial spirit a revenue map that says, well, there's 6 over here and 10 over here, that person's going to say, well, how the hell do I get there? Because the 6 is crowded and it's got a lot of pressure on it, and this other area over here looks, like money's flowing. Money's jamming in here. Money's flowing in here. So how do I get in there? And that's the other part of your question. What are the things that the tech firms do that make that possible? And I think it boils down to accessibility. I mean, you've got that larger cohort of advertisers that is used to doing business with people to get advertising campaigns structured. Now, that encompasses everything from briefing to commercial production to post-analysis to measurement to kind of pricing and all these steps and stages, and with not counting the fact that you've got to get an account to trade with these companies, which, depending on the company you're dealing with, can be a complete ball ache. It can take you weeks to set up an account to trade with somebody. Completely archaic and a real put-off. So you've got advertising agencies both at the consortium level and the intermediate sort of independent level that kind of deal with the cream of those advertisers. And then you've got direct sales departments that deal with the balance. But in all cases, there are degrees of time, difficulty, challenges in configuring a campaign. But why does that still exist? Well, it exists because it works. Advertisers generally don't do things that they know to not work. So if they have a fairly firm view that these TV campaigns that they're doing are actually causing people to kind of purchase their products, they're going to keep doing it. And that's, in effect, what's happening. But the tech firms are having some success with that cohort of advertisers. So out of that 10 to 12 billion, let's just say, that they're kind of taking out, it's just over 2 that's coming from the advertisers that are spending the 6.5 on the legacy platforms. So that is to say that all of the major advertisers are spending somewhere just under $9 billion, on all of their legacy and digital advertising.
Yep.
The rest of it's SMEs. Now, you can't convince a small business operator to make 7 phone calls in Ballarat to get a media campaign away.
Yeah, true.
Right? That is not going to happen. So it's just frictionless for them to go into their browser and dial up a couple of very well-known brands, put their credit card details in, create an ad, be told that will work, and be told that, you just reached a shit ton of people. Would you like to do that again? I mean, it's seamless and frictionless.
It's interesting. I just want to hang on that point because there is a real dichotomy here, right? You go, I was going to ask you next, like, what are some of the specific trends in advertiser behavior that sellers should be aware of or should pay attention to? And it sounds to me very much like ease of transaction, that frictionless nature, the ability to self-serve, the fact that they'll take the money. I mean, so many publishers for so long were getting quite arrogant and almost having like a minimum order or a minimum investment they'd service. So I guess where I say there's a dichotomy here is the one thing that I do actually feel intuitively is still a competitive advantage in these markets is that you do have people on the ground, that you do have a contact person, that can actually go and build a relationship with that advertiser. Does that still have a place? Is that relevant, or is that actually something we're moving away from?
I think that's got a place with a certain type of advertiser.
Okay, yeah.
I'll give you an example. I have a friend who spends a 7-figure amount on advertising on digital platforms, who has, I'm talking hundreds of thousands a month of dollars going into search and social advertising on cost per acquisition basis. And he's a sophisticated marketer, and he understands how to capture all of his customer data and exploit the audiences that he's accruing from those services. He's got absolutely no need to talk to a human because he's got a particular strategy that's deploying quite successfully, and he's got a very automated approach to it. So that's one example. On the other side of the street, you've got small retailers with 2 or 3 outlets juggling smaller budgets, different challenges, who are competing on the high street that need to have a position against larger competitors who have tried to search and social their way into growth, who have failed to do so because they don't have like an exploitable customer database in that space. They might have some online customers, but they really want high street traffic. For that cohort, they need to buy reach. So they may be in smaller markets, they might be in Newcastle, they might be in Sydney, operating on the North Shore, or whatever that case may be, but they need to have a conversation with somebody about how to get reach and how to most, effectively utilise it, and, how to advertise effectively and efficiently in their market. So they need the expertise of a third party. They'll get up to a point where they've got 7 outlets and they'll have an independent agency calling all over them to provide them with that service. So I think, does that evolve into something else down the track? I think it does. I can see a time where sort of a systematic algorithmic approach to sort of assessing a local media environment might be available. But I'm completely unclear on the time frame for that. My kind of take on all this is that in order to sort of maintain the community advantages of a local media platforms to maintain the cultural impact and advantages of local media, and to maintain within the Australian economy the commercial advantages of having a local media environment. Local media has to get itself into a position where it offers that ease of access as well as specific customer service orientation.
Yep. So you're saying really that almost like the type of customer profile will dictate the level of service or sophistication they require.
100%. So if you've got somebody, who wants to utilise your services but doesn't want to deal with, would prefer to deal in their media in a dashboarded way, the way they deal with their search and social and other display advertising needs. Australian media companies now are delivering an enormous amount of digital advertising inventory that can be collated and sold in a very similar manner to the way that those customers already deal with their search and social. If you can create that ease of access for those customers, you get the chance to dig into that 10 billion pool of existing revenue. I think that's an attractive strategy.
The line of discussion here is really interesting because this is where I'm thinking about, what is the unique value of traditional media? And you can think of it at a real high level, but if I'm a seller and I'm working for a legacy publisher right now, how would you recommend somebody reposition traditional media as still being indispensable, in an increasingly sort of data-driven marketplace? To get more specific, I guess it's like, is there still a place where things like trust, community connection, brand safety, community embeddedness, does that still play a role in the actual value proposition you take to an advertiser?
I think it has to. I mean, efficacy, I think, is a big deal. So when we say we're going to sell you a thing, you're going to get that thing. It's measurable. It's accountable. If, in fact, it works or doesn't work, you've got somebody to talk to at the other end of the transaction. I think what we need to do, though, is systemize ourselves to the point that we can dig down into the advertiser pool and offer the smaller credit card investors, and the ones that are paying $1,000 on their card to get a week of advertising away in their local market. They're currently not using traditional media, and they should be. So that's what I mean about that. There are different cohorts of advertiser types. The ones that are down at that level obviously aren't too concerned about efficacy because they're kind of believing everything they're being served up with the current platforms they're using. And I'm suggesting not that the other platforms are doing the wrong thing. What I'm saying is that quite often the way that, outcome is displayed to an investor, an advertising investor, might not necessarily match with the outcome they're seeing in their sales. Everything's pretty rosy in terms of delivery. So I think it's very difficult for a user of those services who's unsophisticated to kind of dig into that and understand really what's going on with their advertising. So I don't think necessarily efficacy is going to be something that's going to appeal to that cohort of advertisers. I think ease of access and transaction is the only thing.
Yeah.
But I think because of the natural level of efficacy that our traditional media companies bring to delivery, like we sell, known impressions, and we deliver what we say we're going to deliver, and we deliver high impact advertising, that it's probably going to deliver an outcome. And I think that in itself is kind of a self-fulfilling opportunity for local media. Look, I think up at that higher level, I really do think that we could probably do a better job collectively of reinforcing our value to the community as an industry, because media serves community extremely well in terms of being mostly regulated or self-regulated in the way that we report news, deliver news, the timeliness. We don't need to be fact-checked in the sense that, we're not carrying conspiracy theories as news bulletins.
Yep.
We're out there serving the community news, information, sport, and entertainment in a way that's accessible and credible. I mean, there's a enormous community benefit to that, which I don't think we are spending anywhere near enough time talking about. There's a flow-on of that to culture, behaviour, standards. So it's mainstream community media, and by that I mean 7, 9, 10 affiliates, press, news corporation, ACM, everybody is playing a role in helping remind community of standards and setting the cultural tone. I mean, that all might sound a little bit high-minded, but we are having a debate about what's appropriate in relation. The most recent example is there's some terrible things happening in the community in the areas of bigotry and racism at the moment. That media is shining a light on that, calling it out for what it is. You don't want to have your entire debate about those things as they occur in your own personal social media echo chamber.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's a community benefit. There's a cultural benefit that flows from, strong community media embedded. And then I think the other piece, which those issues are talked about all the time, but the piece that doesn't get talked about very much is then the third C of this, which is commerce. When those advertising dollars that are spent on those traditional media companies go into those businesses, they do a job of work promoting and advertising products. There's a virtuous circle of activity that occurs with that. A person sees ad, acts on ad, spends money, and everything revolves. Revenues stay in the marketplace. They benefit the community as a whole. My concern around 10 billion plus going offshore, first thing we don't see, obviously, is the taxes associated with that activity don't come here. And then due to, some of you've read the reports about ad fraud. It's measured globally. It's in the hundreds of billions of dollars. The level of ad fraud in digital media in this particular territory is in the billions of dollars. So that's a loss to the local economy. I mean, it's a significant loss to the local economy. And then, that means that what advertising is landing, is it doing a job of work that keeps those local retail dollars floating through the community? And I don't know. Is it at the same level of impact in terms of the commercial outcome of those advertising campaigns? I don't think so. So I think there's a community benefit flowing onto a cultural benefit, and it's all wrapped up in a commercial benefit that the Australian media sector deploys on in the marketplace. And
I think I actually may have tagged you in it, BG. The in New Zealand, Stuff, which is a big publisher over there, they produce, I think it's an annual impact report, which is effectively just a way of highlighting all of the different things they do exactly in the way you were talking about. The advocacy pieces they run, any sort of reporting they do that's very vital to a particular sort of tension point in their society. Anything they do at a CSA level, really, I think what it's there to serve there is just a reminder of the vital role that actually local independent media can actually play in a market.
Yeah, I think it's probably, and again, I can't speak for them, but that feels to me like a pretty reasonable response to the ESG argument that the consortiums were pushing back onto media.
Yeah.
Media, we've got clients, they've got ESG goals, so you're going to help us get ours. Well, that incensed me.
Oh, me too. And I don't work for a publisher anymore, so I can be very, very forthright. Who the hell made the consortium agencies the arbiter of the industry? Like
the consortiums.
Correct. Ridiculous.
So, obviously all that got blown up. It's kind of gone away to the extent that it has. But I think Stuff's solution to that is, well, okay, here's a stake in the ground.
Yeah.
When did you connect communities in this way for a benefit? When did you uphold cultural mores in a manner that is meaningful? When did you ensure that all the advertiser dollars that are floating around actually did a job of work in this community for this economy? Is it being invested in the best possible way that it can be?
Yeah.
So I think ESG goes a bit further than what we've explored to date, and I think that's a pretty good example of sort of putting a counter argument up.
And I don't think anybody's going to sit here and suggest you're taking a position that's anti-ESG, but I just think the manner in which they chose to deploy that, I just thought was, again, it felt really out of scope for me. It felt like virtue signalling, and it felt like just an abdication of responsibility onto publishers. Yeah,
well, we've been through a very, very, very voracious decade of virtue signalling. And so, I don't know where we go from here, but as I say, I'm glad you brought up the New Zealand piece because I think that's a pretty good crack at, just taking the argument a bit further and looking at what is really being delivered. And I think that's probably an area that we need to explore more in the Australian media sector.
I think it also would be an amazing trade marketing exercise producing a document like that too. I mean, if you really think about the magic of media sales, a lot of the time really it's about getting the buyers to feel something emotional about you, to feel emotionally connected to your brand and business. I've always said there's not a whole lot of differentiation from one publisher to the next in any sort of objective measure. It's usually making them subjectively value what you do, how you're different, how you're unique. And I feel like something like that to me would be a really, really strong, really powerful thing to be able to go out to market and showcase as the power of your media platform and the influence, the influence that you actually you have with those audiences that you serve.
Well, subjective evaluation is actually advertising at work.
Yeah.
Objective evaluation is your human element coming into play in the sales area. And I think objectively, your salespeople need to be very, very focused on client outcome. And this is something that, I was raved about at SCA. You need to know that you're working well for your client. You need to make sure that this is doing everything you said it would, because that's the answer to repeat business and to, happy customers are the ones that they call you.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of focus on client delivery, there's nothing wrong with following up and asking the question, how did that go? And now that's a question for a nationally based rep with a major advertising campaign. It's a question for a locally based rep with a small advertiser. It's the same question, because if this didn't meet expectations, then what do we need to adjust?
That's sort of leading on to the question I was going to ask. I've got a couple more sort of tactical questions here for somebody who is currently selling in market right now. And the question was going to be like, what strategies or frameworks would you recommend a seller use to counter that sort of first-party data narrative of the tech platforms? Like you said before, you whack in a credit card, you see a bunch of reach, you get some nice metrics back, and then if you're selling maybe a more traditional media where you might not necessarily have that level of post-reporting, what are some ways that a seller can maybe sort of operate in a market where the customers have been conditioned to see that level of reporting from another supplier?
Well, I think that goes to purpose. Like, what is the purpose of your platform? There are platforms whose singular purpose is the exploitation of customer data. Now, if you're a broadcaster, That's not your purpose. Your purpose is reach. No amount of one-arm paper hangers are going to solve your budget problems, even if you can identify them in your data. I think from an advertising perspective, anybody who's thinking about their campaign strategy on the basis that everything's going to be addressable, I think that's yesterday's hero. They're less influential today than they've ever been, because there's a mix that's appropriate for a successful campaign, and a large part of that mix is reach. Reach has residual value. Targeted ad impressions have immediate value or no value at all. So what is the purpose of your platform? Now, this is quite a hybridized scenario now, because, you know, if you're sitting in a radio station and you've got reach on one hand, on the other hand, you've got plenty of data. So how are you going to deploy that effectively and in the most sensible way? I mean, I'm selling a 2554 campaign to an automotive dealer, but I'm selling, on the other hand, automotive purchase intenders as a component of that campaign strategy. You know, is that, you know, I'm covering both ends of the spectrum. Not completely, by the way, because there's a bloke down the road with the TV station who's going to get more reach than me. So what is the purpose of my component of the campaign? And that's a question then moves into the realm of creativity. What's the message? How does that complement the other platforms that are in existence? So this whole thing comes back to, where do I sit in the mix? What's the purpose of my platform? What's the client objective? There must be a place for me to operate here. But if you've got a buyer who's trying to make a comparison to you based on what they're doing over here with data-driven kind of search and social platforms, I question why they were briefing you in the first place. You know, again, if you're going to be proactively going out to the market and looking to drive business that you haven't been briefed on, then you need to be pretty bloody clear about what that advertiser's activity is, how they go about it, and kind of set yourself up for success by understanding exactly what it is. What's the purpose of them putting you on their schedule?
It's such a good point, and it is so easily lost, because I think that we kind of conflate. I think what's happened, right? So with digital, and I'm a buyer of digital media myself. Like, a lot of what we do with our clients to promote our revenue programs, we buy digital media.
Yeah, and we all sell it.
And we all sell it, right? And I can understand how you could become conditioned to expect that level of post reporting and those levels of metrics that you get from a digital campaign, you know, with other media that you buy. But I think you're exactly right. Going back to the purpose, going back to the role of channel, I think you also raise a great point there around, you know, all of these legacy publishers are increasingly digitizing, you know, their content distribution, for example. And I think in the case of, say, like radio or television or anything, you can obviously take some of those insights, those digital insights, and sort of use that as a proxy for your broadcast. Like, or, you know, to your point, you can look at, you know, delivering a broadcast campaign that's about mass reach, but you can bake into that a more targeted, you know, digital first kind of solution as well. Like, you can kind of have the best of both worlds. A lot of it actually comes down to, I think, in terms of, you know, just creative packaging and bundling of the different things together. Yeah,
no, 100%. And there are very good operators out there at the moment achieving just that. Across multiple media companies.
Who are some, and you don't have to name and shame, but I'd love it if you had some examples. Are there any examples of companies, sellers that you think are kind of successfully pushing back against the tech giants and maybe reclaiming a bit of that budget, or just maybe evolving with the new kind of market expectation?
I'm not being critical of anybody, but I think when we've got 6.5 billion in our pot and there's 10 to 15 in the other, like, we're not doing enough.
Yeah.
Having said that, if you look at we're in a transitionary period at the moment. All the traditional media, and we call them traditional media, legacy media, Australian media, we've done a massive job of work in reframing the distribution of our content to increase our audiences across the board. I can't name a media company that has not made huge strides in developing a digital audience base. Now, I think probably then the issue becomes who are they selling the inventory to? And everyone's trying to go through the front door of the consortiums and make it easier for the consortiums to buy it. And the consortiums are buying as much other stuff as they can get their hands on. So I just wonder whether or not, en masse we're focusing on the wrong customer, because with all this digital inventory floating about, I kind of think it's the time for the SME to shine and get their hands back on legacy media at scale and start buying more of it. But I think it does need an extra layer or an additional layer of development in the industry to make sure that inventory is configurable for those clients.
Well, it's probably not easily done at the moment, given that the majority of great direct sales people in the country were treated as completely disposable over the last 4 years. And lo and behold, we're talking about a soft direct market after getting rid of the resources that actually go out there and generate the demand for these companies.
Yeah, I think that's a case of strategy getting ahead of reality.
Yep.
Because most media companies do see the value in the digitization of their businesses and crossing over those borders, which I think is absolutely correct.
Yep.
But we need to be going back to the roots: community, culture, commerce, like getting into that massive advertiser base that sits below that 40,000.
So to round this out, before we jump to the listener question, I did have like a final kind of future-proofing question for you. Like, what would be your advice, BG, to a media company that's looking to innovate and evolve their offering to remain competitive over the next, let's say the next 3 years, right? I'd like to say the next 5+, but what, if you were running a big media company right now that's legacy, what would you be focused on as part of your strategy?
Well, first and foremost, audience. Right? How do I serve them? Can I serve them better than I do today? And what does that take? Because that, at the end of the day, is the final arbiter of your value, is how much of them you have. So that's number one. Number two is, how do I make it easier for any advertiser to access that audience? There's a pure economic cliff that comes with advertisers of a certain size, where it's just no longer possibly economic to service them with a human. So that's what forces 10 billion plus across to search and social. The economics of face-to-face sales for the smaller advertisers. There's growth to be had in the midsection through people, and there's growth to be had at the bottom through systems. There's benefits to be had right the way through by those systems becoming more sophisticated and serving all of our customers with efficient advertising services. So there's a systems component to this. So audiences, automated systems. It doesn't take the people out of the middle. It certainly changes their job function, less administration, more frontline selling, better delivery. And by the way, when you're selling in that way, it's much easier to connect up systems and do the automated post-campaign reporting, do the automated spot placement reporting, be able to give the customer a higher level of service efficacy after the sale when those systems are kind of joined up. And there are a number of companies around at the moment that are busy in the business of joining those services up.
Yeah.
And I think they'll win.
You know, the companies, there's a couple of companies that come to mind that I'm thinking maybe it's like Domain or REA Group or somebody. I'm sure they'll get frustrated that I haven't attributed it to the correct one, but it's like there's a self-serve platform for the real estate industry. They still have a sales force out in market pounding the pavement, you know, generating the demand, creating the awareness, educating the customers on how to buy, finding the pockets of opportunity to connect into new customers, increasing their brand count. Like, there's still a role for salespeople.
Influence will always be important, and good, solid influence is driven by product knowledge and understanding the customer.
Yeah. And it's funny to round out that point you made earlier, you know, around if you go to any regional operator, they really are tapped into the local economy. They know, you know, I remember in my previous role, one of our partners, Paradise Out of Home, we used to bring those guys down to Brisbane at least every 3 months, and they would literally give us a brief on every single regional market in Queensland. This is what the civic leaders are talking about. These are the major infrastructure projects. This is what drives the economy. These are the pain points in the market. It was microscopic, the level of detail they got into, which is something I think everyone should aspire to. And I think in particular, you know, I think you've always been a big believer of this too, but if there's one thing that you could actually really be focusing on right now, it is just really having a commercial awareness of what's going on in your marketplace.
100%.
All the product knowledge in the world is great, but you're not going to be able to weaponize that unless you actually understand what's happening in the business context around you.
Yeah, there is nothing beats empathy and making connections with customers. And, you know, if you have an understanding about the challenges they're facing, that's, you know, and you can articulate that, that's empathy.
Yeah.
I mean, it opens the door to more realistic conversations about what's possible. And I think people forget that. And it's interesting, the agency system, and I hear, you always read these things in the trade and all the rest of it about, you know, such and such has been awarded this, and such account manager's been awarded this, and, you know, rep of the quarter and blah 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 by the agencies. And there's only one thing that ever comes up primarily as the reason why they're getting the award: frictionless trading.
Yeah,
that's not the words they're using, but they're quick and responsive. Are the words that you'll hear.
Yep.
But that's the currency for agencies. The currency for client is understanding. They understand my business challenges. They understand what they can do. Their part of helping me solve that challenge. No one media company is everybody's 100% solution. So understanding which brick you are in their campaign wall is the best thing that you can do. And the only way to really figure that out is be constantly having conversations with the client. The only way to have efficient conversations with the client is understand their landscape. So all these things join together.
Yeah, and it really is a great point. Like, I think I've always thought that ease of transaction is a real driver of reputation and revenue and all that. And maybe for the first time, kind of going from a position of seller to buyer of media, not that I do extensive media buying, but just dealing with suppliers and whatnot, I'm going, God, it really is the difference. Like I can think of many occasions where I probably bought what might be even a subpar product or you know, not a market leading offering, just purely because of the approach of the salesperson and the way that they've actually been able to interpret my challenge and deliver something in a way that doesn't require high touch or heavy lift. So important, and just something that's constantly worth keeping your eyes on. And I think, you know, the hardest part of it too, and this is for anyone who's chosen to listen to this podcast that isn't a frontline seller, maybe you work in a back end, like a back of house role or a sales support role, like, you have to be so conscious of anything that you implement, you know, and then deliver to the sales team. How does that actually play out in market? Because if you're doing anything with your initiatives or with your product or with your process that make it harder for the customer to transact with the business, like, you really have to be aware of just how significant and how terminal the impact of that can actually be.
100%, right down to invoicing.
Yeah. Yeah, people lose accounts on finance. I used to hear that all the time from an agency head. It was like, you can be the best team in the world.
Going in and coming out. Like, establishing an account right through to receiving your accounts.
Yeah.
And there's vexing issues at both ends for some companies.
Yeah, 100%.
Which kills clients.
So let's jump to the lister question.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
I've actually chosen a different question, and to be honest, this is probably an episode all of its own, but this one's coming through a lot, and I'd just be keen to get your perspective on it.
Hi, Jamie. As a media seller, I'm constantly hearing about AI, automation, and the changing nature of the workforce. How do I future-proof my skill set to adapt to these challenges?
I think it's a really cracking question, and it should be the question on the minds of pretty much all young media sellers and old media sellers. I said to you before that there's a couple of different cohorts of advertisers. There's several different cohorts of advertisers, and AI and systems improvements are going to allow sort of, I think, probably three separate layers of impact. At the bottom level, I think it's going to allow media companies to access a client base that it's uneconomic to do with humans. These are clients that are spending anywhere between, they want to spend $250 a week to $1,200 a week. Some of them might want to spend $10,000 a week, but they don't want to talk to humans. So you've got literally tens of thousands of clients in that cohort that are spending billions of dollars on offshore media platforms because they can. So systems integration through machine learning, artificial intelligence, coming in and connecting things together to sort of take humans out of some of the processes and to more easily facilitate self-serve, creates a whole new revenue stream. So that's not something that the rep has to necessarily be worried about. In that middle level where you're holding clients' hands in a direct level, what AI means is dramatic service improvement. It means sitting in a client's office with an iPad, exploring various reach and frequency conversions in real time, availabilities, combining an algorithm that might be giving them a kind of a broadcast and digital reach measurement estimate that might be drawing on other databases in real time to sort of give a sense of how many purchase intentions for your product type there might be. So you can sit there and do design work, and then you can enter in some briefs and do some creative scoping, possibly give him a commercial to listen to before you even leave the room.
Yep.
And let's go. Let's get this campaign going.
Yeah.
All the things that we dream about, that's what you get. So it means that your level of ability to kind of negotiate changes, because you can have real solutions in real time. Okay, if that's what you're asking, this is how it manifests. If that's what you need, or here are your creative options. All of the BS that I'll go back to the office and I'll have a talk to the traffic manager.
Yeah.
Let me go and get the creative team together to see, whether we can storyboard something. You're kind of doing that in real time. Give them a sense of what they might end up with. So I think kind of those process improvements are really quite handy tools for the reps.
It's funny. I've got an example of how this is playing out in real time with a client I work with overseas. They're implementing AI into their creative process. And, the quality of this technology is world class.
Yeah.
And the typical attitude that you might have, particularly someone in that creative function, would be to go, this is here to replace me. The machines are taking over. How do I undermine this? How do I potentially find a way to deposition this? You can never really truly replicate what a human can do, all this jazz, right? And what's really interesting is the mindset of this department is the complete reverse of that, which is, to your point, how do we become not the laziest version? The phrase wasn't how do I become the laziest version. It was how do I lean into this technology as hard as possible to get rid of the stuff in my role that I can't stand doing.
Yeah, well, we've talked about, the need to have a pretty good understanding of what's going on in a marketplace, like being economically aware and all the rest of it. A lot of that is really talking to clients, spending more time having conversations.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So if you're spending all of your time interrogating ancient systems for PCRs, well, what a waste of time. I mean,
that was actually the most important insight from this department, mate, was, how do we effectively reclaim our time, right? So how do we use this technology to go and get that additional 40% capacity back into the week? Yeah. For two reasons. One, not to make the department run more cost effectively, but to actually be more tactile in market, right?
Yeah.
We know that going out to market and having those kind of high level creative discussions with clients transforms the sales process dramatically, shortens the sales cycle, increases our win rate, allows us to get a higher yield, all the great things that come from using creative as a sales tool. Imagine if I could take it from doing 5 meetings a month to 25. How would that play out if the back end of this is all automated such that I can be that tactile in market and I can contribute meaningfully to the revenue objectives of the company, and I can make the business case for that, and I can document and show that impact? That's the attitude that I think that if anyone takes that attitude, they're going to be fine. It's the people who are sitting here right now resisting or potentially feeling like AI's not got a role to play. I think that's where you're going to really struggle.
For all those people, they just want to hope that the people that are running the media companies they're working for have got the opinion of the former group, because at the end of the day, that's your ticket to ride. Without those systems being implemented, you are not going to be as useful as a media company as you need to be.
Yeah.
And I think the third layer is actually like major clients. So, see, right now, major clients, major spenders have got their own internal media to basically facilitate their transactions with platforms. They're not really facilitating their transactions with national TV and radio buyers or print buyers or news buyers. They're predominantly using it where they've got systems that subvert people. So it stands to reason that if local Australian media has made itself useful to the small end of town through ease of access, that's made our people far more useful, that we might even be more useful to those core spenders as well. And if it's simply a matter of plugging in your reach potential to their screen, that changes a lot. So I think longer term, and I say longer term, these things aren't going to happen anytime soon, by the way. They will happen, and it's like 5 years plus.
Yeah,
effectively.
I think I shared this with you, but just to sort of provide some additional resources for people that are interested in this space, there's a podcast called The AI-Powered Seller that just got released. Jake Dunlap is the guy. Jake Dunlap and Kevin Dorsey. They're two American guys. Jake's been on the podcast before. He runs a consultancy out of Austin, Texas called Scaled. They probably are more focused on sort of that tech space or very much in that sort of enterprise sales space. But just have a listen to it, just in terms of the utility these guys are getting out of like premium ChatGPT and how they're using that to enhance the sales process. Me as a massive user of premium ChatGPT myself, one of the first sort of, I think, steps that somebody could take is just looking at it from the perspective of like, how do I become the most efficient, most effective version of myself, and how do I use these tools? Just getting comfortable and just having some use cases there, I think it's going to completely change your philosophy on AI and automation and what the future could be.
You said it before, using these two tools as tools, freeing yourself up to get smarter about the business you're in, to learn more, to seek more information, to, take more in about, how useful your platforms can be. If there's anything that facilitates you getting to that faster, there's nothing wrong with using it. they're tools to be used.
Absolutely. Well, that was that was a heavy topic we just got into there. There's a lot to be said for it though, right? Like if I think about, I've been to about 4 or 5 countries now and talking to different media companies and sales leaders. This is on everyone's agenda, right? Is we're fighting for dollars in an increasingly smaller pool. The global tech giants are sucking up all these budgets. Clients are being conditioned to expect this type of offering, end-to-end offering and servicing. So this is not a unique challenge. It's probably the kind of topic we would want to try and do some more episodes on. But I think, I'll put you on the spot here without notice. Like, if there was kind of just that one overarching message that you would deliver to somebody who's currently selling media in the Australian market specifically, that was something they might be able to take away and apply immediately, what do you think that would be, BG? What would be that one sort of overarching takeaway for the week or the year ahead for these people?
Oh, look, in combination, our domestic media platforms are still the most impactful advertising platforms in the market. And when we encourage advertisers to invest in them, we're not only doing great things for the shareholders of the individual businesses, we're doing great things for our community, we're doing great things for the Australian culture, and we're doing fantastic things for commerce. I think we're doing important work. We deliver great outcome. It's meaningful to the society we live in. I think that's as highbrow as you can get with it. But, it's very worthwhile work.
That is a fantastic soundbite. And before you go, what's happening with Boomtown this year, mate? What's 2025 all about?
More of the education of those fresh buyers coming through, more masterclasses. We're really excited to be engaged with cans and hatchlings, again, focusing on young people coming through, lots more CMO roundtables, talking to clients about their issues and learning more about what the challenges are as the year progresses. And I think, look, we've probably got another few months of uncertainty in the market at large. We've got to sort out a government, an election, interest rates and all sorts of other things. But I feel like once we're out of this fiscal year, we sort of hit ground zero. So I think, across the board, we can look forward to the next financial year having a little bit more potential in it, which I think will be a bit of a relief for all of us.
Fantastic. Well, look forward to seeing more of that. I know that there's a lot of resources and a lot of articles and a lot of content that gets posted by Boomtown, both in the trade, on their LinkedIn, and obviously on the website. So I'll put a link to that on the show notes too. And I'm sure anyone listening overseas, this would be a great thing for you to actually have a look at. If you're in a market like Canada or the UK or really anywhere with a big regional population, I think Boomtown, sincerely, not lip service, is sort of global best practice for this type of consortium or collective kind of arrangement between media publishers.
Yeah, we've had a number of people offshore actually respond to us with exactly that sentiment, and we've been very open with them around what it takes to get something like this moving, and it's certainly generated interest from interesting places.
BG, as always, mate, thanks for your time today, and wish you all the very best. Sure, we'll get you back for a part 2 soon, though.
Sounds great, mate. Enjoy your travels as well.
Thank you.